It is only by drawing often, drawing everything, drawing incessantly, that one fine day you discover to your surprise that you have rendered something in its true character. Now that was a quote by Camille Pissarro, and he is the artist that we will be studying today in art history. So Camille Pissarro was a French Impressionist painter. His importance resides not only in his visual contributions, his paintings, to Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, but it is also his patriarchal standing among his colleagues. He was such a great influence to Paul Cézanne, Paul Gauguin, and because of his mastery and his kindness, not only did he create beautiful art, but he inspired other people to create beautiful art. So together today, we are going to dive into the life, the artwork, and the legacy of Camille Pissarro. But before we get started, I have 3 key terms that I want you to remember. They are going to pop up through our conversation today, and at the end of our discussion, we are going to use those terms to create some artwork, so I just may test you on them. So here are the terms that I want you to remember. Impressionism, pointillism, neo-impressionism. All right, remember those terms because here we go, diving into the life and the artwork of Camille Pissarro. Camille Pissarro was born on July 10th, 1830, to a Jewish Portuguese family, and he grew up in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. His parents, Frederick Pissarro and Rachel Petit, owned a modest general hardware business, and they encouraged their 4 sons to pursue the family trade. In 1842, Pissarro was sent away to a boarding school in Passy, near Paris, France, to complete his education. His artistic interests began to emerge thanks to the school's headmaster, who encouraged him to draw directly from nature and to use direct observation in his drawings, empirically rendering each object in its truest form. At age 17, Pissarro returned to St. Thomas to immerse himself in the family business. However, the artist quickly tired of mercantile pursuits and continued to draw ship scenes in his leisure time at the shipping docks. In the early 1850s, Pissarro abandoned the family business after meeting the Danish painter Fritz Melby. Following Melby to Caracas, Venezuela, and he committed himself to becoming a painter. This act signals a dedicated independence that Pissarro would never abandon in his career. Largely, if not entirely self-taught, Pissarro was uncompromising in his commitment to his art, a major factor that contributed to his persistent poverty. By 1855, Pissarro had returned to Paris, where he was exposed to the artwork of many of the greats, such as Eugene Delacroix and Jean-François Millet. He had attended the Exposition Universelle, where he saw a lot of paintings, and he also began attending private classes at the École des Beaux-Arts in 1856. He began working with Corot, who was a famous painter at the time, and he encouraged him to submit some of his works to the Salon. Now, taking classes at the Académie Suisse in 1859, Pissarro met Cézanne, who would become one of his closest lifelong friends. In 1861, Pissarro registered as a copyist at the Musée du Louvre, and around this time he met Julie Vallée, the daughter of a vineyard owner in the Burgundy region. They married in London in 1871, and eventually they had 8 children. His daughter, Jean Rachel, nicknamed Minette, grew ill, and she actually died of tuberculosis in 1874. She was only 8 years old. An event that deeply impacted Pissarro. This led him to paint a series of intimate paintings, and they detailed the last years of her life. Now, Pissarro began submitting to the Salon in the late 1860s. His landscapes at that decade reflect his profound knowledge of and exposure to the compositional techniques of 18th century French masters. As I said, he'd been had a job copying paintings at the Louvre. He had been thoroughly studying French masters, so that's what his paintings reflected at this time. However, also in these years, Pissarro grew closer with the Impressionist circle. Keeping a studio in Paris, he preferred to spend his time in Louveciennes, a rural region about 12 miles west of Paris, which was favored by the Impressionist circle. There, distant from the urban environment, he painted in plein air, depicting peasant subjects in natural settings and focusing on light effects and the atmospheric conditions created by the change in the seasons. These new concerns in his art resulted in a more purely impressionist mature style. So he kind of leaned away from that traditional French realism and started painting more impressionistic. Though Pissarro had work accepted at the official Salon in 1859, he would exhibit at the Salon des Refusés with Edouard Manet, who was a part of the Impressionist circle in the 1860s. And this was an important event to his contributions to the first Impressionist exhibit in 1874. Now, the first half of the 1870s is considered the height of Pissarro's career, when he completed some of his most significant pieces, including Hoarfrost, Old Road to Ennery, Pointous. Now, several personal developments contributed to the sophisticated output of his mature period. From 1870 to 1871, he fled to London to escape the chaotic events of the Franco-Prussian War and the Paris Commune, during which time the majority of his early works were destroyed. In London, Pissarro was introduced to Claude Monet, and the two grew to favor J.M.W. Turner's work, which was exhibited at the National Gallery in London. Daubigny introduced them to an art dealer, Paul Durand Ruel, who would later serve as Pissarro's agent in France. Now, having returned to Paris, Pissarro and Monet organized the first Impressionist exhibition in 1874 at the photographer Nadar's gallery. Considered one of Pissarro's masterpieces, Hoarfrost was one of these 5 paintings exhibited in that first Impressionist exhibition. As we look at this painting, you see a peasant worker transversing a field in Pissarro's hometown at the time, Pointous. The painting's emphasis on color harmony is an important event to the Neo-Impressionist technique. Now, Neo-Impressionism is what comes after the Impressionist movement. His true achievement, though, in this painting is bringing a focus on the composition to the Impressionist canvas. Now, Cézanne famously said, "We must make of Impressionism something solid, like the art of the museum." Now, this was in reference to the movement's lack of underlying structure. At this time, Impressionism was new. No one had painted like this before, and the artists in this movement wanted to make it a permanent art movement in museums. They were being refused from museums at this time. They knew they were good, and they wanted the whole art world to see their work. Now, though the exhibition was met with harsh criticism and confusion from viewers, Pissarro's contributions received the more thoughtful commentary from writers and art critics. They noticed the stylistic rapport between the work of Pissarro and Millet, who was an artist who really influenced Pissarro in the early days. Now, one art critic named Theodore Duret, who would reiterate this in a personal correspondence with Pissarro. Perhaps most importantly, Pissarro's professional and personal relationship with Cézanne reached its height during this time of the Impressionist exhibitions, the first Impressionist exhibitions. And by the mid-1870s, the two worked together closely, re-examining and reworking Pissarro's paintings from the 1860s. So Pissarro took his original works and started reworking some Impressionism into them. Now, by the late 1870s, Pissarro's work revealed conflicting stylistic choices, drawing him away from the purely Impressionist technique. As Impressionism became more widely accepted, Pissarro worked to keep his art avant-garde and relevant by testing new theoretical concepts. Now, he and Edgar Degas made prints together based on the compositional technique used by Japanese woodblock engravers. He also began collaborating with the next generation neo-impressionist painters Paul Signac and Georges Seurat in the mid-1880s. Now, this affiliation with younger artists was due to both political and professional affinity. Aesthetically, Pissarro was interested in the pointillism technique, which was exposed by these artists for its theoretical basis in color theory, a concept that resonated with his original exposure to empirical drawing as a child, and his Impressionist fascination with the effect of light on color. Now, politically, Pissarro was a committed anarchist, and the color harmonies underpinning pointillism, created by the juxtaposition of complementary colors, were linked in his mind to the utopian promise of social harmony achieved by the union of individuals in an anarchist society. So to him, pointillism represented his true political society. He found that all the little dots of color kind of represented people coming together in what he thought would be a beautiful society. After 1884, Pissarro settled in Urigny, which is a rural village about 3 miles south of Pointus that became the subject of hundreds of his paintings. In the 1880s, Pissarro acted as both student and mentor to the neo-impressionists Signac and Seurat. Hay Harvest at Urigny, this painting here, it shows the result of the collaborative experiments in tonal value and different painting styles. Notably, though several of the Impressionists grew away from the movement in the 1880s and beyond, Pissarro is the only one to move into the neo-impressionist style, which is seen here in this painting. More than ever before, his short dash brushstrokes evince something akin to pointillism, weaving together the landscape and the figure. Pissarro's career, which spanned nearly 4 decades in and around Paris, saw great changes in the makeup of the city. Through his life, the city kept changing and changing. Now, the city planner renovated the city, and this broadened Paris's avenues. And the liberalization of Parisian labor laws during those years allowed for greater free time for the average citizen. As a devoted anarchist, Pissarro surely applauded this opening up of the everyman's creative leisure time. In this late career hybrid of Pissarro's many artistic styles, we got a little bit of realism, impressionism, pointillism, neo-impressionism. He celebrates the city's modernness in one masterly canvas. Now, on the main street in the neighborhood of Montmartre, a famed impressionist haunt, Pissarro indicates a freedom of both physical and social mobility through his emphasis on the breadth of the street, the openness of the sky, and the bustle of the people and the carriages that populate the City of Lights, Paris. Though the notion of Pissarro as a political painter is a contested one, events in his personal life bear out his deeply held affiliations. In 1894, after an Italian anarchist assassinated the French president, Pissarro briefly moved his family into exile in Belgium to avoid political persecution. Briefly thereafter, Pissarro fell out with his close friend Degas. There was the Dreyfus Affair, which began when the French government convicted the Jewish military captain, Alfred Dreyfus, of treason. When it was discovered that Dreyfus was innocent and that the government chose to cover up their mistake rather than admit their fail, the reaction in French society showed a tendency towards anti-Semitism that was intensely troubling to the Jewish Pissarro. Degas was among those whose latent anti-Semitism came to the fore in response to the scandal, to the extent that he would cross the street to avoid his former friend and artist collaborator just because he was Jewish. Now, sadly, Pissarro actually died before this affair was ultimately resolved. But the polarizing incident magnified his dedication to social justice in his final years of life. Now, in those last years of life, he had contracted a reoccurring eye infection, and this negatively affected his ability to work outdoors. But he did continue painting from the window of his home and at certain Parisian hotels. Now, Camille Pissarro passed away in Paris on November 13th, 1903. He was 73 years old. His life had a profound influence on many other esteemed artists. Mary Cassatt said he was such a teacher that he could have taught the stones to draw correctly. Cézanne said, "He was a father for me, a man to consult, and a little like the good Lord." Pissarro's family would go on to continue his legacy, with many of his children and grandchildren pursuing a life in the arts. His son Lucien, who adopted a similar impressionistic style from his father, described him as a splendid teacher, never imposing his personality on his people. So that was the life of Camille Pissarro, a little of his legacy. But what has he left behind? What is still here? What did he do in our art world? So Pissarro was greatly influenced by realist landscape artists such as Corot and Mallet, and he was greatly influential to a host of younger painters, as I've stated multiple times through our discussion. So as a result, his body of work created a vital bridge between 19th and 20th century realism and abstraction, especially within the legacy of French modernist painting. So his personal investment in the evolution of aesthetic techniques contributed to significant developments in later artists. He was always experimenting, always trying something new, and then also teaching other people how to experiment and try new things. So in particular, Cézanne famously learned the Impressionist style in the early 1870s by copying the work of Pissarro. It is not a stretch to say that this relationship was a pivotal step on the long road that ended with Cézanne becoming the father of 20th century modernism. Their artistic interchange lasted for decades, and Cézanne, 3 years after Pissarro's death, identified himself in a retrospective exhibition as Paul Cézanne, pupil of Pissarro. Specifically, Cézanne's work shows a willingness to construct a painting not only via the intense study of nature, but also through the manipulation of color to arrive at a truer visual image. Gauguin affectionately referred to the intuitive nature of Pissarro's art, and Gauguin's frank and naive rendering of French peasants in his early career and Tahitian villages in his mature work owes to Pissarro's direct, unadorned depictions of the rural countryside. So again, as I said in the beginning, the middle, the end, not only did Pissarro create beautiful artwork, but he inspired others. He taught others to create beautiful artwork. So our key takeaways today in learning about Camille Pissarro is don't be afraid to experiment with new styles and approaching to paintings. That's what Pissarro did his whole life. If you can always paint carefully and realistically, try taking some spontaneous approaches. Try something abstract. Try something new. And also connect with other artists. When you read letters of Pissarro, you can feel that he had a strong sense of community with his artists, and it's always great to connect with other people. That's why we like to come together in groups and make artwork, because we get to see other artists and get inspired by others. So that is the life, the legacy, the artwork of Camille Pissarro. Thank to him for making our world a more beautiful place. Now we're going to take all that stuff we just learned, we're going to pull it all in, and we're putting it on a paper, okay? I mentioned those 3 key terms. Those 3 terms were 3 artistic movements, and that's what we're going to put in our sketchbook today. So I'm actually, instead of grabbing a pencil today, I want you to grab 2 different color markers. We are going to use a little bit of color, and we're going to try a couple different techniques that Pissarro was famous for utilizing. So grab a blank piece of paper, grab your sketchbook, and 2 colors. It doesn't have to be markers, maybe crayons, maybe pastels, maybe 2 color paints. We're gonna put some impressionism, some pointillism into our journal today. So let me flip this around and we'll get started. All right, you got your sketchbook out to a blank page, and then I want you to grab 2 colors, crayons, pencils, markers, whatever. Just grab 2 colored things today. We're going to use a little color in our sketchbook. But before we get started with some colors there, let's get those terms we learned down onto paper. So our artist today was Camille Pissarro. And our terms were Impressionism. We hear that term a lot, don't we? We study a lot of Impressionist artists. It was kind of the first major art movement after realism. Everyone before Impressionism kind of painted the same way. They painted to, you know, make it look like a perfect picture. And Impressionism started going a little more abstract and kind of opened the art world. So that's why we study it a lot. It was an important time in art history. Now the next term is pointillism. That's another art movement, and that came after Impressionism. It was inspired by Impressionism, by the play on light and color. And then that last term was Neo-Impressionism. Neo-Impressionism came after Impressionism. Pointillism is kind of in this movement. So pointillism is a kind of painting. Neo-Impressionism is a movement. So pointillism is in this movement. Neo-Impressionism was inspired by the optical theories of Impressionism, where people focused on the way light changed color. But instead of kind of using broad painting brush strokes, they did dabs of color, especially primary colors, to kind of create the effect of light. All right, so I said grab 2 colors, and that's because, as I said, Camille Pissarro was part of each of these movements. He was always experimenting, always expanding, always trying something new. So we are going to do a little square of each of these movements here. So I want you to draw 3 squares on your paper. Each of these squares will be a different kind of technique, a different movement in art. So the first one is Impressionism, using our 2 colors. We're going to split the square in half, right in the middle. I want you to do the darker color on the bottom, just doing kind of lines straight across, not coloring boldly, just broad lines. It's okay if you come outside the box. Life is too boring if you stay inside the box. So sweeping brush strokes like they do in Impressionism. Now grab your other color, the top half of that box, same thing, sweeping brush strokes. So you're not doing it solidly, you're just getting those sweeping brush strokes, and I want you to pull a little of that color down into the bottom, playing with light and reflection there, just like the Impressionists did. So there's our Impressionist box. Pointillism. Now pointillism, can you guess, is dots, is points. So using both colors here, I want you to just fill this box with points, little dots. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen, probably Seurat is the most famous pointillist artist. One of his most famous paintings is in the Chicago Institute of Art. And it's huge, it's giant, it's like as big as a wall, and this is what he does the whole time. He does little dots. It always amazes me when I think of him painting that whole canvas, little dots, what patience he had. But what pointillism is instead of mixing the colors off of the canvas, you know, on your paint tray, how you would mix 2 colors, it's layering colors side by side to get that same kind of mixed effect. So I'm grabbing my second color now and I'm doing dots. So instead of layering off the canvas, they would do these dots all over to see what the effects were, like how does it look when you put a dot on top of the other dot? How about side by side? How does it change the color? So that's what pointillism is. And you know, if I would have put the orange first and then the blue, we would have maybe gotten a whole different color. Whole different outcomes. So that's what pointillism is. All right, all my polka dots. No, Neo-Impressionism. So that was the movement. It's also kind of can be post-Impressionism, Neo-Impressionism. It came after Impressionism, and it kind of took what we learned in Impressionism of light, of color, and it mixes it with pointillism. And it's, just a different technique of getting your impression of the object, the place, the thing onto the canvas. So this was how Pissarro kind of ended his art career, was painting in this style. He didn't do these small little dots. He did shorter little brush strokes like this. But it kind of had that same effect when he would lay colors side by side. So instead of doing small little dots, he experimented with how color interacted by doing these short brush strokes. And I want you to try both ways, little dashes, both colors. This one I'm kind of going just back and forth with my colors. All right, there we have it, everybody. You just did 3 short little sketches there in 3 different artistic ways. We got Impressionism in box number 1 there, Pointillism in box number 2, and then our Neo-Impressionism in box number 3. Wahoo! Well, my lovely, lovely artists out there, I really hope that you enjoyed learning about Camille Pissarro today. I hope you learned something new, and I hope that he inspired you to create in your own life. So, I hope to see you all again next time. May you have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone, and happy, happy creating to you all. Bye!